The haunted mirror. The antique mirror was a steal at the flea market. Its ornate frame, tarnished with age, hinted at a rich history, and its dark, reflective surface seemed to hold secrets untold. I hung it in my living room, admiring the way it added an air of mystery to the space. As the days passed, I started noticing strange occurrences. Objects would move inexplicably, shadows would dance in the periphery of my vision, and a bone-chilling cold would settle over the room, even on the warmest days. I initially dismissed these events as my imagination, but as they grew more frequent and intense, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft whisper coming from the living room. Curiosity piqued, I crept toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew louder as I approached the living room door, and I could make out a single word, repeated over and over. Beware! I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The whispering intensified, morphing into a guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I pushed the door open, my eyes widening in horror at the sight before me. The mirror was glowing with an eerie light, its surface swirling like a vortex. A figure emerged from its depths, tall and skeletal, its eyes burning with malevolent intent. It lunged at me, its skeletal fingers reaching for my throat. I screamed and stumbled back, my hand instinctively reaching for the doorknob. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling as the creature's ragged breathing grew closer. Finally, the door swung open, and I tumbled into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my ears. The growling continued from the other side, but it slowly faded as the creature retreated back into the mirror's depths. I never went near that mirror again. I sold the house soon after, leaving the haunted antique for the next unsuspecting owner. The memory of that night, the chilling whisper, the skeletal figure, and the feeling of its icy breath on my skin continues to haunt me to this day.
The cabin in the woods. The old cabin had been in my family for generations, a relic of simpler times nestled deep in the heart of the Adirondack Mountains. It was a place of cherished memories, of childhood summers spent exploring the woods and fishing in the nearby creek. But this visit was different. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, a chilling premonition that something was amiss. The first night I lay awake, listening to the wind howling through the trees, its mournful cry sending shivers down my spine. The old cabin creaked and groaned, its familiar sounds now amplified in the darkness. Then I heard it, a scratching sound, faint at first, then growing louder, as if something was clawing at the wooden walls. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The scratching continued, relentless and insistent. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but the rough-hewn logs of the cabin walls. The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving me in a silence that was somehow more unsettling than the noise. I tried to dismiss it as an animal, a raccoon or squirrel seeking shelter from the wind. But deep down, a primal fear gnawed at me, whispering that something more sinister was at play. The next day, I ventured out into the woods, hoping to shake off the unease that had settled over me. The familiar trails, once a source of comfort, now seemed menacing, the towering trees casting long, ominous shadows. As I walked, I noticed strange symbols carved into the bark of the trees, cryptic markings that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickened my pace, eager to return to the relative safety of the cabin. But as I neared the clearing, I froze. A figure stood in the doorway, its silhouette dark against the fading light. It was tall and imposing, its form vaguely human but with an unnatural, animalistic quality. I ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding in my ears. The figure stepped out of the cabin, its movements fluid and predatory. It was then that I noticed its head, unmistakably that of a wolf, its eyes glowing with an eerie luminescence in the gathering darkness. I watched in horror as the creature stalked around the clearing, its senses alert, its movements purposeful. It was hunting, and I was the prey. I crept away, my movements slow and deliberate, careful not to make a sound. The creature's senses were sharp, and I knew that any misstep would betray my presence. I circled around the cabin, keeping to the shadows, my eyes fixed on the creature as it continued its relentless search. As darkness fell, the creature's movements became more frantic. It snarled and growled, its frustration growing with every passing moment. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. I had to make a run for it. I took a deep breath and bolted, my feet pounding against the forest floor. The creature's head snapped up, its eyes locking onto mine. It let out a blood-curdling howl and gave chase. I ran as I had never run before, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The creature was faster, its long strides eating up the distance between us. I could hear its ragged breathing behind me, its claws tearing at the undergrowth. Just as I thought it would catch me, I stumbled upon the creek. I plunged into the icy water, the current pulling me downstream. The creature hesitated at the water's edge, its glowing eyes fixed on me as I was swept away. I managed to pull myself ashore further down the creek, my body numb with cold and fear. I collapsed on the bank, gasping for breath, my clothes soaked and clinging to my skin. I had escaped, but the memory of the creature, its wolfish head and glowing eyes, would forever haunt my dreams. The cabin in the woods, once a place of cherished memories, was now forever tainted by the chilling encounter. I never returned, leaving the old family retreat to the creature that now claimed it as its own. The Adirondack Mountains, once a place of peace and solitude, now held a dark secret, a terrifying reminder of the wildness that lurks just beyond the edges of civilization.
The vanishing hitchhiker. The desolate highway stretched out before me like an endless black ribbon, the headlights of my car barely piercing the thick darkness. It was well past midnight, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the dry brush. I was driving home from a late-night work trip, exhausted but eager to get back to my warm bed. As I rounded a bend in the road, I noticed a figure standing on the shoulder, their thumb outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. It was a young woman, her face pale in the dim light, her clothes damp and disheveled. I hesitated for a moment, a flicker of unease in my gut, but the sight of her standing alone in the desolate landscape tugged at my conscience. I pulled over, and the woman hurried towards the car, her relief palpable. She thanked me profusely as she climbed into the passenger seat, her voice trembling slightly. She introduced herself as Sarah, explaining that she had been involved in a car accident a few miles back and had been stranded ever since. As we drove, Sarah recounted the details of the accident, her voice growing more animated as she spoke. She described the blinding headlights, the screech of tires, and the sickening crunch of metal. She had been lucky to escape with only minor injuries, but her car was totaled. I listened intently, offering words of comfort and reassurance. Sarah seemed grateful for the company, and I felt a sense of satisfaction in being able to help. But as the miles passed, a nagging feeling of unease began to creep in. Sarah's story was full of inconsistencies. She couldn't remember the make or model of her car, nor could she recall the exact location of the accident. Her details were vague, her timeline muddled, and there was something about her eyes, a distant, almost vacant look that sent chills down my spine. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights approaching, but the road behind us was empty. We were alone, surrounded by miles of desolate highway. As I turned back to Sarah, I noticed a change in her demeanor. Her smile had vanished, replaced by a blank, emotionless expression. Her eyes, once filled with gratitude, now burned with an eerie intensity. "You're not taking me home, are you?" she said, her voice flat and chilling. I felt a surge of panic, my heart pounding in my chest. "Of course I am," I stammered, trying to maintain my composure. "Where do you live?" Sarah's lips curled into a sinister smile. "I don't live anywhere," she said, her voice a low growl. "I'm already home." The air in the car grew heavy, the temperature plummeting. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Sarah's form began to flicker, her body becoming translucent. Her voice echoed around me, growing louder and more menacing. "You're mine now," she hissed. "You'll be with me forever." I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the deserted highway. I fumbled with the door handle, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. Sarah's laughter filled the car, a chilling sound that echoed through the darkness. Just as I thought I would be consumed by her spectral presence, a blinding light filled the car. I shielded my eyes, and when I looked again, Sarah was gone. The car door swung open, and I stumbled out, gasping for breath. I stood on the deserted highway, my body trembling, my mind reeling from the encounter. The road stretched out before me, empty and silent. There was no sign of Sarah, no trace of her presence. I climbed back into the car, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled back onto the highway, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I never picked up another hitchhiker. The memory of Sarah, her chilling words, and her spectral form haunted me for years. I knew that I had encountered something beyond comprehension, a creature of darkness that lurked on the edges of reality, waiting to claim unsuspecting souls. The desolate highway, once just a path to my destination, now held a sinister significance. It was a reminder of the unseen world that existed alongside our own, a world where the boundaries between the living and the dead were blurred, and where the creatures of our nightmares roamed free.